Hi, and welcome to Rosebud Homestead, where our community focuses on food security, self-reliance, and emergency preparedness. Today, we're going to be doing food security, and thanks to Cindy Rom, one of our regular watchers who suggested this, we are going to do both freeze drying and dehydrating of celery, and then we're going to turn it into powder. And we are working on vegetable powders, getting a whole collection of them, and we'll be doing a video on what you do with these vegetable powders. So we'll get started on this when we come right back. Jim brought home 9 bunches of celery, and there was only one thing to do, and that was to do another one of our freeze drying and dehydrating videos. So we're going to start with the freeze dryer. Last night I cut up a lot of them. I cut up 4 of the bunches of celery, and they are in our regular freezer, freezing solid. So we're going to go first of all out to the Kelvin lab. Kelvin is the name of our freeze dryer, genderless. But that's what we call it. And so we'll go out to the Kelvin lab and get those started. And then we'll come back and we have this giant bowl of celery that is ready to go into our dehydrator. So I'll meet you out in the lab. Here we are out in the lab, and Jim put in a brand new shelving unit for me, so I'm pretty excited about that because we're starting to load things up with our freeze-dried food. So Kelvin is ready. It says load food into freeze dryer and close the drain valve. I love this because Kelvin tells me what I need to do. So I'm going to close the drain valve and we'll open this up. And here is our celery on trays that is frozen. We put it in last night. So we're just going to slip these in here. Replace the insulating cushion. Okay, we've done everything here, and so I'm going to continue. And it was down to 16 degrees, so it says freezing. So it'll go down to about 40 below, 50 below, and then it will start bringing the temperature back up. The water will sublimate and leaving the cell structure in place, which is the difference between freeze drying and dehydrating. Because in dehydrating, the water is driven out by heat and the cells shrink, which is why they are going to be much smaller and harder than these will. I expect that this will take about 24 hours, and so we probably will not see you back here until tomorrow. So let's go back into the kitchen and work on our dehydrating. Whenever I do dehydrating, or freeze drying for that matter, I try to think ahead of time of what it is I'm going to be using the product for. And this time, because I know I'm going to powder everything, I cut the celery in larger chunks. So it will be interesting to see. I've not done celery in larger chunks before. This is how I usually do celery. This was done in January of 21, so it's about 6 months old. And these were much smaller pieces, diced celery, because this is how I usually use a dehydrated celery. And this was before we got our freeze dryer as well. And I just use these. I throw them in soups and stews and whatever I want, and they rehydrate beautifully. And then the celery's cooked. It doesn't ever in either of these processes get back to fresh looking or tasting, but they are in a form that are readily usable. So all we have to do here is just spread these out, and you may notice that I have cut up also the celery leaves. I saved the hearts of every celery bunch for the dehydrator. There's a little bit of the leafy stuff out in Kelvin, but most of it is dehydrated because I don't imagine it would do really great in the freeze dryer. Just my thinking, but I don't know. So here's one tray ready to go. And I will finish these trays and get them in the dehydrator. And then I imagine it will take probably about 10 hours in my dehydrator. And so we will be back when these are ready. It's the next morning, and both processes finished in the dead of night. And so here are the results. This is the dehydrated celery, and I'll tell you, my conclusion here is it didn't make any difference that I cut these larger than dices, because they turned out to be the very same size as the ones I showed you in the jar yesterday. So these are little hard nuggets of celery. Over here we have the freeze dried, and I mean they could blow away in a wind. They're so light. No more moisture here. Now we're going to be powdering both of these, and I'm just kind of curious to know. It looks to me like the obvious thing is that the volume of powder from the freeze-dried is going to be greater than the volume of powder from the dehydrated, but we'll see. It's about the same amount of celery, not quite. There's a little bit less on this side, but let's see. Now, I'm going to use my Vitamix to do this, and I was using just the regular container before, and then right down here when I was doing, I think it was the dehydrated spinach, that was so hard, it etched the bottom right here, and actually it etched the green into the plastic, and so I had to use Clorox and everything to get it clean. But I'm sad that this is kind of now cloudy down here. And then one of our subscribers, in fact several, mentioned that I should get the dry food container that is especially made for grinding wheat and doing things like vegetable powder. So I did, and I'll tell you, it was not cheap, but I'm really glad to have it. I tested it with some dried asparagus earlier in the week. So this is what we're going to do. The dried asparagus was freeze-dried, and so I really have not tried anything dehydrated yet. So this is going to be our first, and I'm going to start with this. And so here we go. I will probably do a couple of these trays, and I'll come back and get all these little pieces picked off. I just don't want to take time on camera to do that. And the directions say on this container not to run it for more than 2 minutes. So I won't. Here we go. Now the blades on this one are especially designed to throw the food up instead of off to the side, which is what etched my other container. So let's see if this works with these hard little nuggets. Seems to have worked. Now let's see how fine of a powder it is. Whoa! Asphyxiation by celery powder. Wow, look at that. Ooh, it just smells, you know, like celery. So there we have the first 2 trays. All right, I'm going to finish these other 4 trays off camera, and then I'll come back in just a few minutes and we'll do the other side, the freeze-dried. Here is the yield from the dehydrated celery, and that, let's see, Jim brought in 9 bunches, and I used 4 for here and 3 for here. About 3.5. So this is about 3.5 bunches of celery. And so those of you that have a dehydrator but not a freeze dryer, you know that you can now do this with powder if you have a machine that handles powder. And there are a number of them. You don't have to have Vitamix. There are lots of them out there that work. Okay, let's see now what our yield is for the freeze dried. It's a little bit later in the day. We had a bit of an interruption, and I have piled all of the celery onto just one tray. So here is the dehydrated celery in this jar, and so now we're going to see how it compares with the freeze-dried celery that will blow away in the puff of a wind. It's so light. Okay, let's try this much and see how we do. Whew. Okay, slow. Increase the speed. Seem to do a really good job. We'll let the dust clear. And this is what this looks like. So we'll pour it in here. It seems to have a different texture than the dehydrated. A little bit of a different texture. I'll do one more and then we'll finish off camera. Okay, so this is quick and easy. I don't know if you can see the difference here, but the freeze-dry texture is a little bit finer than the dehydrated texture, but I bet they're both going to work just fine. All right, I'm going to finish up here and we'll be back when the rest of this is done and then we'll compare. So here are the results. This is the dehydrated and this is the freeze-dried. So it really was not a fair test. To be a fair test, I should have done the weight and then compared the weight afterward. We could have had a more true calculation, but it appears to me that the freeze-dried is a little bit more fluffy, and I think a lot of the volume here is air. This is a little bit coarser grind. Jim suggested that we could probably just run this through a second time and make it as fine as this, and we probably could. However, I don't think there's going to be a bit of difference once we get to using these. And so that's what I'm excited to show you. I have a few more vegetables to do, and then we're going to have our vegetable powder video where I show some, I think, really cool things that you can do with vegetable powders. So I'm going to just vacuum seal these very quickly here. And this is a powder, and I don't want it to come up here. I could take one of our coffee filters. We're not coffee drinkers, but I keep coffee filters for things just like this. But I think the powder is low enough. If it starts to come through here, I'll turn it off. Okay, it was pulling air from the very bottom. I could see the powder move from back here, from clear to the very bottom. So that's good. So these are now both sealed. Many thanks to Cindy Rom, our viewer, who noted that in our previous video on dehydrating celery before we had our freeze dryer, I showed at the end how to make celery salt. And she said, what about people who can't eat a lot of salt? could you just do powder? So thank you, Cindy, and here are the results of your suggestion. So thank you all for being with us, and we will see you at our next video. Jim brought home 9 big stalks of celery. Is it a stalk of celery? Is it a clump of celery? Is it a great big bundle of celery? I'm not sure what you call it.
Bunches of celery.
Bunches.